2024 updated Seaside Oregon pros and cons. I'm also going to take a walk along Broadway and along the promenade, which I'm on right now. So if you're not familiar with the area, if you've never taken a walk along the promenade, join me in this video and let's talk about some pros and cons. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, Living on the Oregon Coast. Today we're going to take a walk through Seaside. I'm on Broadway Avenue. If you're not familiar with Seaside, you want to visit the area, or maybe you're just quickly passing through, Broadway is the place you can go that will very quickly kind of give you a feel for what the town is like. It's got a great turnaround at the end too that takes you down to a promenade, which is also sort of unique. Not every town along the Oregon coast kind of has like the promenade that Seaside does. For some context, it is a weekday. It is a Tuesday right now. If you're wondering about the congestion, because it does get actually a lot busier on the weekends on a Saturday than it does on a Tuesday. We are in June right now, so kind of heading into peak season. And I want to talk to you about some of the pros and cons of Seaside, Oregon. We've done a video like this in the past. It's been about a couple years. This will be an updated list. In fact, at least one of my former pros and cons is I'm gonna actually flip-flop those around and switch those. And a lot of pros and cons, quite frankly, of course, are going to be subjective. Now, cost of living is gonna be subjective depending on where you're coming from. So the first pro, getting into it, we're gonna start with pros first. We'll save the cons for last. The first is going to be location, location, location. You know, that's a saying from real estate. Nothing's more important than location. And Seaside has a really, really great location for a lot of different reasons. If you're not familiar with the history of Seaside, it is a resort town, which is different than a lot of other towns along the Oregon coast. A lot of other towns, like say, like in Astoria or a Newport, those towns were built around industry, things like timber and fishing, whereas Seaside is specifically just a resort town. It was designed specifically for tourism, and Seaside is also the closest town to Portland. Cannon Beach is right about the same distance. The way that people are getting to Seaside is from Highway 26. It runs east to west, and when you get to the 101, the road that parallels the Oregon coast, Seaside is just a couple miles to the north. Cannon Beach is a couple miles to the south. Usually pretty congested right when you hit 101 off the 26, but you usually get through it pretty quickly. The great thing about this location is having close proximity not only to Portland, but a lot of other great things as well. There's going to be a lot of really probably more events that you're going to find and things to do in Seaside than probably anywhere else. So the location gives us good proximity to PDX, just about a couple hours away. We also have good proximity to other big towns and shopping. If you're somebody that, if shopping is important to you, there's only one Costco on the northern Oregon coast. It's about 20-25 minutes north of here. And there's a bunch of other stores around there. There's kind of the whole entire shopping hub for the northern Oregon coast is gonna be in Marchant, just 20 minutes to the north of here. Getting towards the end of Broadway, this is that turnaround that I mentioned. You can see this is probably one of the more popular beaches along the Oregon coast, one of the better beaches, one of the larger beaches. You can go for a couple miles in both directions. And as you can probably see, the beach is fairly crowded. One of the great things about this area though is if you do want to find a beach that isn't crowded, I mean, we're talking about beaches where you can't really see anybody as far as the eye can see. You just have to go a couple miles away from here. So being so popular, this beach is always crowded, but definitely you can find some beaches that are pretty secluded near here. And because the location is so great here, that takes me to my next pro, which is going to be just events, things to do, things going on. There's more events and things to do and things going on around this area on the northern Oregon coast than really anywhere else along the coast. And of course, Seaside is no exception. with their downtown that we just walked through. They have a lot of events that take place right there on Broadway. There's a couple car shows every year. There's a huge volleyball tournament that takes place at the end of the promenade every single year, where we just passed. You also have Hood to Coast. Hood to Coast is the longest walking, running relay in the United States. So you actually start at Mount Hood. Got a handful of people, like half a dozen people, that do a relay all the way over here, and it ends just right here behind me at the end of the prom. And so you can really find as many events and things to do, restaurants here as anywhere else. So if you're somebody that's looking you know, to be able to have at least some kind of consistent things to do, at least throughout half of the year. It does get kind of slow in the winter time. This is going to be one of the better places for you on the coast. There are, especially when you go down south, there are a lot of towns that are pretty quiet, that don't have a whole lot of things going on throughout the year. And my next pro is going to be the fact that this is a resort town. It was designed as a resort town, and that's really kept the economy strong around here, which is important because there are a lot of towns along the Oregon coast that don't have very strong economies, that are pretty defunct. In fact, Seaside, when I was growing up, it probably wasn't as popular as it is now. And so the thing is, with you know, not having the economy to support a lot of growth, end up with like a lot of defunct buildings, a lot of rundown kind of looking neighborhoods. And I do remember that a fair amount when I was a kid, but things are trending more towards the direction of Seaside being a really, really popular town. Of course, vacation rentals are becoming more and more popular. Seaside does allow short-term vacation rentals. If you're not familiar with short-term vacation rentals and all the rules and regulations, we do have a separate video on that. It's going to vary from county to county, city to city. You're also going to have HOAs to contend with, but Seaside does allow short-term vacation rentals. The rules are based on density. If you have more questions, we can talk to you about that, but that's one of the kind of the many things that's going to keep this economy strong. And so if you're thinking about moving here anytime in the near future, and maybe you're worried about growth, you're worried about your investment, whether it's just a primary dwelling or an investment property, you can feel pretty confident that the economy is going to remain strong in Seaside. All right, now let's get into some cons as we pass the, just one place to check out if you come here, Seaside Aquarium. Not quite as big as the Newport Aquarium. It's really just kind of a building with a bunch of bigger fish tanks, and they got some seals in there that you can feed. So not quite the equivalent of the Newport Aquarium, but maybe fun for a few minutes, especially if you have little kids in there, you know, feeding the seals. And you might have noticed, I should mention this, I'll point this out, since our last video, if you watched our other video on the Seaside pros and cons from a couple years ago, there's a fair amount of complaints about the weather. And probably rightfully so. A lot of people complain that I shot this video when it was raining and didn't exactly paint the city, you know, in the best light, I guess figuratively and literally. So it wasn't too hard for me to find a nice day here today, because really from now, kind of May to June all the way to October, you're going to get a pretty consistent weather like this. I'll just show you my weather app real quick. But pretty much for the next 4 or 5 months or so, you might get the occasional rainy day, but mostly pretty moderate, a lot of sunny days. And so the one thing about when we shoot these videos is, of course, we're very busy people, Paul and I, and we put these in the calendar to shoot at a specific time when we're available. And sometimes the weather doesn't cooperate. And when I shot the Seaside video, maybe I should have saved it for later, but I was just too busy. So I can understand the complaints about me shooting that video when it was rainy out. Funny thing is, I've also got the complaint on the opposite end of the spectrum. I've been accused of only making videos when it's sunny out, and people say that's inauthentic, and I'm sort of being misleading because it rains a lot in Oregon, and I should be authentic and show you what it actually looks like instead of just going out and shooting videos on nice sunny days. So I get the argument from both sides. Not going to make everybody happy, but we definitely do try and shoot these videos at a time when it's going to paint the city, you know, in a good light. All right, now on to some cons. Let's talk about some things that you might not like about Seaside. First thing that I have on my list was actually one that I had as a pro last time, which is going to be cost of living. Why did I put that as a pro last time? Because it's really close. Seaside, depending on what you're looking for, what type of property and what type of living you're going to do, Seaside might fall kind of below the average, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. As it stands right now, they're right about probably average home values for the state of Oregon. For last month, the median home listing price was right around $600,000, whereas the state of Oregon is closer to lower to mid 500s. And the reason why that probably is because property values have gone up here a lot because Seaside has been so popular and because of a lot of those short-term rentals. Those short-term rentals do have a lot of value, and so those things can help to prop up home values. And where we stand right now, and this is a big problem actually in Cannon Beach, just south of us. The people that live in Cannon Beach cannot afford, the people that work rather in Cannon Beach cannot afford to live there. So it creates a little bit of a housing problem. Seaside isn't really near that kind of level of people not being able to afford to live where they work, but it's getting towards that trajectory. It's definitely becoming more unaffordable for the people that work here, the people that were born here, you know, the people that have lived here their entire lives. That's one of the gripes you'll hear from them is that home prices have gone up so much over the years. So again, this is one that's subjective. If you're coming from California, home prices are going to be fairly inexpensive. They're going to look low to you. If you're coming from Texas, they're going to be high. But in the context of the state itself and kind of where things are heading, I'm going to keep this in the cons category right now, because home prices, which is what mostly affects your cost of living, do sort of are skewing a little bit on the higher side, especially compared to the rest of the Oregon coast. There's a fair amount of places that you can find along the Oregon coast where home values are like in the 400s, for example. And the next one on the list is going to be probably really the most subjective, which is going to be crime. We do get asked about this quite a bit. If you just do a quick search online and look at crime along the Oregon coast, you are going to be able to find some things that tell you that crime is higher, or maybe that lead you to believe that crime is sort of high in some places. If you're coming from any major metropolitan area, crime is going to probably feel virtually non-existent to you. If you've lived here your entire life, that's who, just like the housing, that's who you hear a lot of the complaints from, is people that have lived here their entire lives, because they were used to decades ago crime being virtually non-existent. Whereas now, what do we see along the Oregon coast? We do see some drug problems, specifically with meth, which does tend to lead in higher burglary rates. So that's a lot of the complaints that we see, is locals experiencing burglary. It's not a bunch of violent crime like rape or murder or anything like that. And they've probably seen a little bit of an uptick over the last couple of years. So you are going to be able to find some people that are going to tell you that crime is higher or crime has gone up. But in general, crime is very, very low. If you want me to help you, because this is what we're supposed to do as real estate brokers, we're supposed to direct you to data, especially if I'm working with you as a buyer. In fact, our ethics really prohibit us from speaking directly to a client specifically about crime. We can direct you to data, but speaking to you as a large, broad audience here on YouTube, I can talk to you a little bit about things without just specifically citing data. But it is always good just to look at the data, because that's going to tell you the real picture. But anecdotally, crime along the Oregon coast is very low. You can probably find some data that's going to make it look high in Seaside, because it might just be a little bit higher than some of the other surrounding areas where it's kind of virtually non-existent. But with that being said, it is, like I said, it is a little bit higher in some places of Seaside, probably going to be lower than wherever it is that you're coming from. Next thing, going to address, as you saw walking down Broadway, congestion. Like I mentioned, when you come into town coming from the 26, once you hit the 101, it's really kind of bumper to bumper all the way up until you get, if you're looking at a map, until right about the town of Gearhart. That's where the congestion seems to alleviate most of the time. It does move fairly quickly though. It doesn't take a long time to get through the city, but it just feels congested when you're always bumper to bumper. And of course, when you're walking down like on Broadway, you saw how many people there were. This is on a Tuesday. It's jam-packed in the summertime and a Saturday. So if you're somebody that doesn't like a lot of crowds and tourists and waiting in line at restaurants, that might be a con for you thinking about potentially living in Seaside. And then the final one, I've got one more for you before you go. We did an entire video on this topic, the big one. Get a lot of questions about people that come here for the first time about tsunamis. They see these signs around town. You can actually see in some places on the road where it's drawn out if you are entering or leaving a tsunami zone. And Seaside is about the most, if not the most, susceptible to a lot of damage from the potential big one. So what's the big one if you haven't heard about, and if you don't want to take the time to watch my video, what it is there have been a series of earthquakes over the past 10,000 years, about 300 or so. And they come about once every 300 years or so, and we're right about the average right now. It's been about 300 years since one of these massive earthquakes happened that will create a tsunami that's big enough to wipe out a lot of this area, or at least do an extensive damage to this area. So it is a very real threat. It's a very real thing. But I will say this too, the other thing to know about that video, again, 10,000 years, there's been about 33 events every 300 years or so, something like this happens. It's been almost 300 years since the last time it happened. I will say though that within that data, if you look at that data, there is a gap where it was about, if I recall correctly off the top of my head, I haven't looked at this in years, but about 1,200 years, there was one gap between these major events that created one of these major tsunamis. So why do I say that? Could happen today, could happen tomorrow, might not happen in our lifetime. Very hard to predict. Again, if you want to watch the video, I go into a deep dive on it. But what I just explained to you is kind of the short of the long. So if you're going to live around here, I would suggest that the advice is that you at least understand where the tsunami zones are. It might sound funny, but we do keep life jackets just in case maybe it comes and we're down at the beach and we can't get back to the house and into the car and out of the tsunami zone, which we are in a tsunami zone in time. At least we'll have a life jacket, probably better than nothing. So I do, and we do take it seriously, but at the same time, there's a lot of people in here that certainly aren't living in fear of that happening at any given moment. Of course, if you have more questions about that, if you have any questions about moving here, buying or selling a home, anything at all, I invite you to call, text, email. You can get in touch below. All of our contact information is in the description of this video. I hope this helped you get a better understanding of the pros and cons of Seaside. It's one of my favorite towns and a lot of people's favorite towns along the Oregon coast. We've helped a lot of people move to the northern Oregon coast. Again, if you're one of those people that's thinking about taking the next steps, get in touch with us. And if you want to see more videos about what it's like to live along the Oregon coast, we have hundreds of videos on this channel that we release every single week. Make sure and subscribe. And if this video helped you, give me a thumbs up. Lets me know I'm doing a good job. And you can comment below too. If you have questions, comments about Seaside, anything at all, feel free to drop it in the comments and we'll reply back. Until next time, take care everyone.